Yes, good evening everyone. Welcome to the Houston Maritime Museum. My name is John Milligan. Originally from Scotland, been involved in shipbuilding and design for over 40 years and thoroughly enjoy my work. The talk this evening obviously is going to be about the SS United States, but not in its entirety. It's going to focus mostly, not all of it, on the underwater part of the ship. That is the part of the ship you can't see. And that's the part of the ship that interests me the most, and I hope you'll gain some interest as well. It's not a simple procedure, it's a very exacting procedure, and if you don't do it properly, it can cost you a lot of money, because the ship won't move as efficiently as it should.
Excuse me.
Now, by explanation...
Is there any way you can speak any louder?
Yeah, okay.
We can't hear you very well back here, I'm sorry.
Okay. Is that any better?
That's better.
That's better. Okay. So like I was saying, the underwater shape of a ship is very, very important. The investment in a ship, regardless of any size really, is very, very expensive and can be very, very costly if you don't get that shape, underwater shape, just as right as you can. It's like a car tire. A car tire is always a compromise. You never get it perfect, but it's a constant compromise, and that's what a ship's hull is all about. Now, just to give you an understanding of what a ship has to do, a ship has to interact with water in 3 dimensions. Your car only interacts in 2 dimensions. So a ship has to go up and down through the waves, has to go yaw side to side, and it actually bends back and forth. It can hog and sag, as we call it. And again, the construction of the hull itself must withstand these forces. And in the very simplest terms, I'm going to show you what a ship's hull basically is. And we've all seen a steel beam, an I-beam or an H-beam. And here is the steel beam that I'm talking about. Now if we take this beam, put it down here and lengthen it, that's basically what a ship is. Here's the deck, here's the bottom, and here's the side of the ship, what we call the shell. And if you put a bow on it, and if you put a stern on it, you've created a beam. And this is what we call the hull girder. And it would resist bending in any direction, really. So this, in its simplest form, is what a ship looks like. You'll have this part down the center. This is called the longitudinal centerline bulkhead. And you'll have basically a compartment on this side, a compartment on that side. If it's holed in here, if the hull is penetrated, this floods, but the other side does not flood. And then you have watertight integrity to a degree. Now the SS United States had 5 separate compartments. The Titanic didn't even have 3. That's one of the reasons she went down. Now, the SS United States is about the only 5-compartment ship. If she gets ripped open through 2 compartments, 3 are left, so she'll still float. And that's about the only ship that can boast that ability. Now, as I mentioned, what we have to do is to produce a hull that's going to work. And as you know, nearly every ship has its own purpose. So when we start to build a hull for a certain purpose, we basically start with what we're all familiar with. And this would be the underwater hull I was telling you about. Now when we start with a brick. That's the simplest thing to understand. And that's actually what we start with. It's so long, it's so wide, and it's so deep. Depending on what the purpose of the hull is going to be, we go through a refining process, or what we call iterations. We go in circles, they get bigger and bigger and bigger until all the questions are answered, and then we go off and build it. But there's an iteration process or a refining process, a lot of discussion about the purpose, the construction, the length, the width, etc. Now we have to develop a hull that's going to be efficient. And we say efficient as efficiency for moving through the water, and if it is efficient, it's going to be fuel effective, so to speak. And this is obviously that's one of the greatest concerns of a ship owner, because the price of oil fluctuates so much that it can literally sink you for a ship owner. But nowadays, and this is the this is the exciting part that I'm involved with now, we've actually just finished the design for the first offshore supply vessel to be built in the United States, powered by gas. Not gasoline, but gas. Liquefied natural gas, actually. And instead of tanks within the ship containing diesel fuel, now we have a long cylindrical tank that contains the gas. And once that gas is used up, they take the whole tank out and they put a new tank in. The downside to that is, if you have any kind of a breach of that system, that gas is pressurized and it's actually stored in liquid form, so it's very, very cold. If there is a breach of that system and that gas leaks and goes from a liquid to a gas, it's still very, very cold, and it can literally break the ship, because it will turn the structure in so brittle that it would actually break. Not that's the worst case scenario, but it can happen. That's the downside to gas. The other downside to gas right now is there's no real infrastructure. There's no gas stations at every corner. In fact, they're coming up with a design now where they would have what they had in the Second World War for the Germans, wolf packs, the submarine wolf packs, and they had a large submarine that was called the milch cow, and it would take out diesel in stores and sit waiting for the wolf packs to come to them, rather than go all the way back to Brest in France. So the milk cow, there's actually a couple of designs out there right now for these LNG supply ships that would sit at appropriate locations along a trade route. But that won't last too long because they'll develop ships specifically for that purpose with sufficient fuel to get from point A to point B. There'll be a dedicated build, dedicated design. So here we'll go through iterations to develop an efficient hull for the purpose that it's being built. Now, the refined hull for a cargo ship, as I've just described, has to be efficient, and it also has to have a maximum load safely, for obvious reasons. And so we get to an efficient hull shape, and that is the description. Say for a cargo ship, fuel efficient, of course. Now let's have a look at some. Ships. Oil tanker, self-explanatory. A container ship, we also call them box ships because they carry these containers or boxes. And the big ones now, they started out with 3,000 capacity, and they now have ones that are carrying upwards of 15,000 containers. And they're talking of going to 18, and that's about, I think that's about as big as they can go. And a reefer ship, we'll see that. A reefer ship is a refrigerated cargo, and a very common refrigerated cargo will be bananas. We'll have a look at a ship of that kind. So let's have a look at an oil tanker. It's just a big brick, isn't it? And this one's quite old. This is the Jarry Viking. You're probably looking at about, she was just over 500,000 tons. She's now laid up. But she was about the biggest tanker ever built. And as you can see, she's got a very bluff bow. She pushes the way through the water, just pushes the water aside, and a very long hull in itself. And every tank up to the front of that accommodation block at the back, we call that the bridge front. Up there, all the way forward, up to what we call the break of the forecastle, which is just about here. The deck comes here, it rises, and the deck at the very front of the ship is called the forecastle or the forecastle. And this is all cargo, all oil, and not much else. And very, very expensive to operate. Normally a single screw, very slow speed, and built for maximum cargo carrying capacity. Not very pretty. Now here's something that's a little bit more pretty. This is a box ship or a container ship. This is a Ned Lloyd. It's a German company. This one's fairly old, but as you can see, the bow is much finer now. You'll see that the side of the vertical side of the ship doesn't come all the way forward, not nearly as much as the oil tanker did. And this primarily is for speed. The container ships have slowed down. They used to be coming over from Asia, doing anywhere between 21, 23 knots, and they'd be pushing right along. And if they did come into a storm, a bad storm, they would start to lose containers. And you've seen photographs at Long Beach where the whole stack is just leaning over. So this is another hull shape. We're getting finer and finer. Now here's another one, not just as fine as the container ship, but again it's got this very fine bow line. It's quite narrow. Again for speed and efficiency through the water. And that's a geest ship. That's a banana carrier. Now the underwater part is, up till now, we haven't seen any underwater part of the ship. We've seen what's above the surface. So let's go underwater and have a look at what's there. Now here's a typical cargo ship. We're taking it out of the water, and I've given it some appropriate names to describe what the parts are. Whoops. And what to do. So the basic description of the ship, here we go. This is your hull girder, and that's what we're looking at now, is the hull girder. And the carrying capacity is on the inside, as you can see. Let's go from the bow to the stern. First here, on the far right, is the bulbous bow. This is a shape that was introduced a few years ago, rather than just a straight V shape. This bulbous bow cancels out the bow wave, which creates a lot of friction on the ship's hull. The bulbous bow in itself cancels out that bow wave. You still see a bow wave, but it's not nearly as detrimental as it was just if that bulbous bow was not there. So this is an addition to an efficient hull. Just after that, you'll see there's a bow thruster. This is a propeller. The normal propeller faces this way, aft. This propeller goes across the ship, a thwart ship as we call it, and it allows for maneuverability in tight spaces. I think Queen Mary 2 or even the Queen Victoria, the latest ones, they all have between 3 and 4 of these bow thrusters up forward for maneuverability. Now PMB and PMB, it stands for parallel mid-body, and that's this part of the ship. This is where your cargo is carried. This is where your money's made, and that's known as a parallel mid-body, or the brick. It's the same thing. And the last one I want to point out to you, as the ship goes through the ocean, it's very rough. They want to stabilize to try and make it a comfortable journey, and they have what's called a bilge keel. And we'll look at that further on for the United States, because the United States have these as well. So there's a very simple, typical cargo ship arrangement. Here's your cargo, here's your bow and your stern, and that's basically what you're looking at. So the purpose matches the shape of the hull. And then if we go on to the hull of the SS United States, we'll get a look and a sense of what the ship shape of the SS United States is by looking at another ship. And this will give you an indication of where we're going. So here is an Iowa class battleship, and you'll see it marked on there PMB, and you'll see the PMB of this particular ship is much further aft than the Iowa, and the PMB forward is very close to the bow. Now, because the purpose of the battleship hull form is vastly different, you'll see the forward part of the parallel mid-body is quite far aft, and the bow just keeps on going and going and going. And she has a very, very wide beam or width, because for a battleship you want a stable platform to fire your guns. You don't want the hull be going up and down like this when you're trying to hit the enemy. So she's a very beamy type of ship, what the SS United States is not. Now the other thing I want to point out, the yellow line, you'll see I've put in what's called a fine entry. And I think a fine entry is fairly self-explanatory, and you can actually see that it's a convex curve as you look into the ship from the side. Now try and remember that, because we have a convex curve here, and that designates as being a fine entry for a ship. Well, yeah, the fine entry is good and bad. It allows the ship to cut through the water very efficiently. It doesn't push it aside like we saw in that big tanker, and makes for a more efficient passage through the water. But as you see up forward, it's very, very narrow, so you don't have as much push on the hull from the water underneath. So you don't lose, but you don't have the buoyancy. You can't have the buoyancy you want and a fine entry. You can't have both. So a ship like that, and I've actually seen film of this, but a ship with a very, very long fine entry will not go over a wave, it will just go straight through it. And that itself can cause quite a bit of damage, and has done to several ships. Even taken out, I've seen photographs of taken out the bridge windows, which are 40, 50 feet above the hull. So, here she is. Most beautiful ship ever built. And just leaving New York by the looks of it. Now, there's that yellow line again. And you can see the SS United States attained the speed she could, A, with the power that was in her, and B, with this hull form or hull shape. And here again is that convex curve to allow this fine entry through the water. Now here's a cousin, the Queen Mary. You'll see her form, it doesn't go convex, it's concave all the way. So it's pushing water out of the way, where the SS United States slices its way through the water. So this ship has to push water out of the way, and the SS United States just cuts through the water with that fine entry convex shape. And here's the SS United States under construction in the dry dock, and you can see again this long, beautiful curve as it goes from convex to concave along the hull itself. One part of the ship that is not too clear, but I can see it. With a ship as narrow as this, she could possibly, in an extreme case, go through a wave. And because she's got this fine entry, she's not going to lift up over the wave because there's not the buoyancy there. She's just going to go right through it. And in a worst case scenario, green water, what we call green water, which is not bubbles and froth and stuff like that, it's solid water, that would come up over the bow, go along to the front of the accommodations, and it could do severe damage. And I think I recall now it was an Italian liner called the Michelangelo, and she had her bridge window smashed in and the whole bridge front smashed in as well. So what we have in this part of the ship here is what's called a breakwater, and it's a V shape. If this is the bow of the ship, it's a V shaped piece of steel like this. The water comes over, it's shed off by what's called the breakwater. The breakwater shape is a V shape this way, and it V's forward as well. So the water can't come up and over the breakwater. It forces it off to the side. But again, but it's not very clearly shown in this particular slide. But again, here's that fine entry that allows for the superior speed of the ship. So we have a long, narrow hull that can go pretty fast. there would be no problem at all to water ski behind the SS United States, even if she was just cruising. On sea trials, the best I can confirm is that she was over 38 knots. That's maybe getting up around 45 miles an hour. For 53,000 tons, that's not bad.
Amazing.
Now, with a long, narrow shape like this, she was plying the Atlantic. And the Atlantic winter storms can be pretty bad. As you've experienced one?
Well, when I was on it, 2 hurricanes hit us
Oh,
from each
really?
side. It was
Okay.
very.
Yeah. And she rolled?
I had a can of hairspray in the medicine cabinet,
Yeah.
and I was seasick, of course, and I could hear that hairspray go this way
And that
and then that way
Yeah.
through the whole day.
Well, when a ship is long, as narrow as that, yes, she will roll. And in reading, I think she would tend to roll about 20 degrees. 20 degrees out of 90 is not very much, but when you're experiencing it, I can assure you it can get look and feel a lot more than 20. So what they have is what they call a bilge keel, and you can see it's like a very long fin of a fish. It has to stay within the confines of the extreme of the hull, so it doesn't get damaged. And it would go typically about a third of the length of the ship. When we say the length of a ship, we break it up into 10 sections or stations. You have the stern, you have the bow, and you have what's called midships, which is at station number 5. So that bilge keel would start at station number 5 and go forward and aft a third of the length of the hull to be effective. But it's not very effective. But it's fixed, and it's about the simplest thing you can do before we get into the other solution, which can be and is expensive. Now, again, the hull shape must be able to have a fine edge to cut through the water, has to have bilge keels to reduce rolling, and now she has to have propellers to push her through the water, and that hull shape also has to allow the water to get to the propellers. Otherwise, you're not going to get that thrust. You can have all the power you want, but if you can't make that hull shape efficient for the water to be delivered to the propellers, then it's not going to be efficient. And the underwater hull shape was researched over and over and over again on paper by using wax models and toning through a tank and see what the resistance was going to be and what was the delivery to the propellers to get the maximum use of the power induced to these propellers. Now you can see the yellow lines that I've indicated. It's a very clear, open stern section to the ship, but there's lots of ability to bite that water. As you can see, she's got 4 props, and if you look closely, you'll see the outside props have 4 blades, and the inside props have 5 blades. And the 4-bladed props are further forward. The theory is that when the ship passes through the water, the undisturbed water will get to the 4-blade props first, and then they'll be able to use the water. But as the water comes aft to the 5-bladed props, it's all kind of disturbed, and you're not getting that push from the aft props as you do from the forward props. So forward props, undisturbed water, 4-blade, aft props, 5 blades for slightly disturbed water. And that's the compromise they would have to make. Obviously a 5-bladed prop is far more expensive than a 4-bladed prop. And I'll explain this as we go on, but this ship, I don't know if it still has, but it had 2 complete sets of props. And you imagine how much they cost. They were about 18 feet diameter and a very special alloy, manganese bronze, very hard material. So there's that nice open stern. Now here's what the SS United States could do very, very easily, because she had huge amounts of power. On trials, she put out about 240,000 horsepower. She was rated. no, she put out, I can't remember what she put out during trials, but she was rated at just over 240,000 horsepower, which is slightly over 100 per prop. And yes, she had so much power that it's like you with your car, if you spin the wheels, you're going nowhere. Okay, you produce a lot of smoke and you're making a big show, but you're not going anywhere. Traction is the answer. If you have that much power that you can spin your props fast enough that it's not biting the water and pushing it forward, then you get something that's called this cavitation. Now you can see it's just a swirl of bubbles. And that is the pressure, it's the pressure difference, and bubbles are produced. And when these bubbles are produced, they last a very, very short period of time, and they implode. And when they implode, they create a shock wave, and these tips, the leading tips and sometimes the trailing tips of the props, are just chunks taken off them. And they become, instead of nice and smooth cutting through the water, now they're rough. And now the cavitation starts at a much slower set of revolutions, because now instead of a smooth blade, now it's rough. And then that cavitation, and it's just an ongoing process, it just gets worse and worse and worse. And that's why the SS in the United States named 2 sets. They had to change out the props at every dry dock, because yeah, she had so much power, she was just chewing up the props. And they were very expensive. And in the worst case scenario, down here in the right hand corner, you'll see a sheet cavitation, where the cavitation not only is produced on the blade tips, but all over the area of the blade itself. The propellers are made obviously to propel the ship forward, but on occasion the ship has to go backwards. So the efficiency of the propeller is designed when the ship is going forward. But like I say, sometimes it has to go backwards. I have seen a photograph where the SS in the United States was going in reverse, and she was doing in excess of 20 knots. The top speed of the Titanic was 23 knots going forward. So now you can appreciate the power that she had. Because going backwards, these propellers were not built for going backwards, but they put her in reverse at the same speed as the Titanic going forward. Again, an indication of how much power she possesses. So the final hull, narrow and sleek, but would tend to roll. The bilge keels that we saw on each side, the fixed bilge keels, they helped a little bit, but they also called stabilizers. And then we saw the smooth open stern to allow the water access to the props, undisturbed as possible, to give it that push forward. I'd like to say, to my eyes, the underwater shape of the hull is the prettiest to my eyes. Now I mentioned about the stabilizers. What we have nowadays are stabilizers that fit into watertight compartments in the hull and then can be extended just like the wings of a bird. They can either be passive, which means they're just fixed in place, or they can be computer controlled, and we call them active. And as the ship rolls one way, the stabilizer will tilt in the opposite direction and will cancel out the rolling. And these computers can actually predict the roll, and it can reduce the roll by about 80%. So you can through really rough weather, it's just like a mill pond. They're astonishing. But again, very expensive to put into the budget of a ship. And there we have it. The SS United States is in limbo, as we know. I've been with the Conservancy now ever since its inception, but I've been involved with the ship since about 1990 when we used to go to Washington. There was only maybe 4 or 5 of us. The Conservancy has not only saved the ship, we bought the ship, we own the ship, but we can only sustain that ownership for a short period of time. We've got docking fees, insurance, a myriad of expenses. We have been helped out by some New York investors, but again, a decision has to be made very, very quickly as to what to do with it, because the expenses are mounting up. I've been through the ship twice in Philadelphia, and because I'm experienced, I can appreciate what I'm looking at. And the ship is ripped out completely. It's all back to aluminum bulkheads and cables and vent trunking and all the rest of it. All the plumbing fixtures, all the walls, bulkheads have been taken out, and it's back to the bare bones. The bare bones that I looked at are in perfect condition. Like the day she was built. I only saw one little part up forward on the foredeck. I won't go into that, but that's just cosmetic. The ship is virtually in brand new condition. She has been so well constructed and so well maintained and so well built in the first place that she is in excellent condition. To put her back to sea as she is, it would not be a viable situation. She's got 2 separate engine rooms, steam turbines, oil fired. They would just be horrendously expensive to put her back. Of course, I'd love to see her go back to sea. Of course, I'd love to water ski behind her. But I can't see it happening. The best guess scenario I can have for the ship is that she's going to move from Philly. She's going to be docked in New York on the waterfront, and she's going to be refitted for office space, condominiums, restaurants. In other words, kind of a shopping mall / office ship. And that seems to me quite a viable solution. Property taxes, she's floating, so I don't know if she would qualify for property taxes, right? But I'm sure New York would find a way to get money out of it. But so there she is. Like I say, the part I was talking about tonight was the part of the ship that you don't see. I hope I've given you some insight into why she has that shape and why she could go so fast as she did. And if you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them.